Hello and welcome to the M.B.Om podcast, where you'll learn to master the business of yoga. M.B.Om is a proud part of the Wander Barn Podcast Network, and I'm your host, Amanda Kingsmith. I'm a 500-hour registered yoga teacher, a yoga business coach, and a total business geek. Here at M.B.Om, you'll learn everything you need to know to create a sustainable yoga business by learning from myself and guests from around the world about how they built their yoga businesses, and about how you too can become a successful yoga teacher, studio owner, and much more. All right, let's dive in. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the M.B.Om podcast. I'm really excited that you're joining me for today's episode of the show. And this week's episode of the podcast is brought to you in part by OfferingTree. OfferingTree is your one-stop shop for all things yoga business, from your website to your live stream classes to your video on demand, courses, memberships, and much more. I'm going to tell you more about OfferingTree later on in the episode, but if you want to check them out, head on over to OfferingTree.com/MBOM. And today on the podcast, I am really excited to be joined by Kelly Smith. Kelly is an E-RYT 500, a YACEP yoga and meditation teacher, the founder of Yoga for You, and host of the podcast Mindful in Minutes and Meditation Mama. She is also a mom to a beautiful little boy, and in this episode, we're discussing all things motherhood and maternity leave. As a yoga teacher and solopreneur, it can be hard to navigate planning for maternity leave, so I wanted to pick Kelly's brain on how she planned for her time off, how long she took time off for, what the transition of coming back to work was like, and much more. So for me, a good chunk of my Q4 of 2021 was spent planning my maternity leave, backlogging things like podcast episodes and all of that type of stuff, and just getting prepared for, the new year and welcoming a little babe into the world. And when you've never had a baby before, it can be really hard to know how to navigate time off, how to plan for it, how to plan financially, how to know how much time to take off, et cetera, et cetera. And so for me, I've turned to, my mom and also dad friends for a lot of recommendations. And it was really fun to be able to sit down with Kelly and have a pretty casual chat about what her maternity leave looked like, how she prepared for it, all of that type of stuff, and just talk all that through. So if you're somebody who is maybe doing some upcoming family planning for this year or the coming years, or maybe you're a business owner with a new baby like myself, then this will be a really helpful episode for you. So I hope that you enjoy. And without further ado, here is Kelly. Welcome to the podcast today, Kelly. I'm really excited to have you here with me.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to dive in with you. And I think this is just going to be a really great casual conversation where we get to talk about all things yoga business and all things motherhood. And you've been on the show twice, but the last time that you were on the show, you didn't have your little one. So maybe catch me up over the last couple of years, what you've been up to the point of, getting pregnant and then entering the stage of motherhood.
Oh my gosh. Doesn't it feel like since the last time we spoke, it's just like, that just feels like a lifetime ago. Like right? Like everything is so different than the last time that we spoke and we connected. And so I guess I'll try to make it as concise as possible. And remind me, when was I was trying to remember what month was the last time that we spoke. I can't even remember off the top of my head. I should have looked this
up before. Let me just check. I feel like it was like the summer of 2019.
Okay.
So July of 2019.
Yeah, that sounds right to me. So I that year since we spoke, I would say the year, summer of 2019 through, springtime of 2020, when just the whole world turned upside down. That was probably one of the wildest, but best, times in my business and my career where I really felt kind of oh my gosh, I'm actually doing it. And I was doing a bunch of trainings and retreats and kind of traveling all the time and being really nomadic. And, my podcast was growing and all these things where I just felt wow, like it's actually really starting to like happen, like these things that I've been dreaming of and this life that I've been dreaming of. And then March 2020 rolled around and I found out I was pregnant about, I think 3 days before lockdown happened in the US. And I was supposed to, like in a week's time, I was supposed to go to the UK for like a little bit of like a UK tour. I was doing like different trainings and events. I was going to be there for a few weeks. And so I found out I was pregnant. And then like 3 days later, everything locked down. I had to pull the plug on that whole UK trip. And then COVID happened. And my husband, we were talking a little bit off mic before, he works in like the COVID unit and works in the hospital. And it seems like everything just hit like a complete stop, like events stopped, traveling stopped, like honestly, like the money stopped, everything just stopped. And I was just pregnant and in a pandemic of March of 2020 and just not knowing what to do. And it was so hard and so tricky and scary. But it also ended up being a blessing in disguise because I don't know necessarily how, and I don't know how much you've shared about your pregnancy journey. But for me personally, I was very sick for like a very long time, like the first like 20 weeks or so. I'm apparently one of those people that just like is like allergic to pregnancy. And so I ended up being in bed just like a lot and being really sick. So not being able to travel ended up being a little bit of a blessing in disguise. But I just went from like feeling like I was kind of doing like all the things to doing like nothing. And then also figuring out, I know we'll dive into this today, but figuring out not only how am I going to keep my business afloat in this new, like unprecedented time, but how am I going to, adapt my business to now be a mom and create a maternity leave, because for the non-US listeners, the US has like no maternity leave, especially for like entrepreneurs and for people that do work like you and I do. And so if I was going to create a maternity leave, I was going to have to kind of create it on my own and make it viable for me to be able to take some time with my little guy after he was born. And he's now 1. So, I we'll get into the weeds of all of that, of how I did that. And then he's 1. And ever since then, I've still been trying to figure out like, and I don't know if balance truly exists between motherhood and running a business. And that balance is going to be different for everyone. I'm still figuring out mine. But now I'm trying to figure out how to not only sort of change the style of my business and what I do with now still being the primary caregiver for my son, but also just figuring out like what I want now that my role has changed a little bit with mom. And I've kind of been doing, part-time on my business. So I have childcare a few days a week, and then doing part-time mom, where there's days where I'm, 100%. We call him baby pork chop. So 100% with pork chop, and just figuring out like what life now looks like and what balance looks like and what I really want. And I don't know if I have all those answers figured out, but I'm kind of just trying my best. So I mostly now work on my podcast, doing a lot of virtual events and some trainings. And then I've just started getting this year back into a little bit of traveling and doing some retreats. So I did one this fall, and then I'll do 2 next year. So that's kind of what I guess my business model is looking like right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for sharing all of that. And it's just, I feel like I've thought a lot about like these pandemic times are kind of in some ways like a great time to be, shifting and slowing down and going through these big changes of stepping into motherhood, because it's like, oh, well, I'm not going to be able to go to restaurants and I'm not going to be able to go to social events and travel as much. But at the same time, having to kind of flip everything, like getting the news of being pregnant and then getting the news of COVID and lockdown. And especially during this time where the virus was very like uncertain and quite scary and stuff like that. And we didn't know how it was affecting people. I can imagine that would have been like such a whirlwind to go through, on top of thinking about like, hey, how do I navigate like creating a maternity leave for myself? It's like, how do I navigate a maternity leave and pivot my business with this pandemic? Is that kind of how you felt, or?
Yeah. And to be completely honest with you, I had like a really, really hard time at the beginning. And I genuinely, I mean, I was like, truly, I now looking back on it, like I was really struggling with some depression at the beginning of my pregnancy because I felt like I felt like I was like mourning in a way for like the loss of my business and like not necessarily. And I want to preface this because I feel so grateful to have my little guy and to be able to bring life into this world and to be pregnant. And it was so interesting isn't quite the right word, but the one thing that I feel like it's really changed. And Amanda, you have to tell me if you've experienced this yet. It might not, really happen until like baby is here, but like ever since I became a mother, my capacity to be able to hold two conflicting emotions in the same body has gotten so much greater. And there's so many things that are like bittersweet or like wonderful, but also like really challenging and hard. And I think my first time I really, really experienced that was when I realized that becoming a mother and being pregnant and like really trying to figure out how to keep my business afloat was like, especially coming off of the year that I had where I felt like it was just, it was really fun and like exciting. And I was really doing like some things and feeling like I was building momentum. And it was like half of me was so excited to finally be doing this thing that I've been dreaming of becoming a mom and having a family and like having children. And then also this part of me of realizing that last year that I just had, like, I will never have a year like that again. Not to say that I won't have, years where I feel like I'm really doing it, but it will never be like that year where I could basically be like nomadic and doing tons of travel and, doing it without children, right? Like I knew that it would never, ever quite be like that. And I think the first time I really experienced these two like opposing emotions of being like over the moon about having the ability to have a child and to start that chapter, but then also like in a way saying goodbye to not only my 20s, but goodbye to kind of this like really nomadic lifestyle of business and, the constant like hustle and saying yes to everything. That was really hard for me too. And so that and kind of then the COVID era of all of that fear, like I really, really was struggling in the beginning of just being like, what do I do? Because usually in times of struggle or times of challenges, I would, maybe throw myself into my business or, vice versa, right? If business was a little bit trickier, then I, would really kind of find that enjoyment in that life and like in like family or friends. And so it was honestly, it was really, really hard at the beginning. And it was so interesting and challenging at the same time to be taking all these steps and milestones within like COVID times. And yeah, I think there's so much of me that just felt like a little bit in like survival mode of like, how do I stay afloat now? Like what do I do now? Because there are these two layers of not only figuring out, as business owners, what do we do now in these, unprecedented times, but also what do I do now that I'm about to be a mom? And I really struggled with it, to be completely honest. And it was hard.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. And I feel like I've definitely gotten like the first little bits of kind of like the grieving that you were talking about, and definitely like some of like the mom guilt. Like I feel like there's, you have these thoughts of like, oh, my life is going to be really different. And I feel like immediately your brain's like, but like, I'm grateful for this, like, baby, I love you. Like, don't get the wrong impression type thing. And I think it's one of those things where it's like hard to talk about. And especially in this world where so many people are battling infertility, which is absolutely heartbreaking, is like, as somebody who's carrying life, it's like, you don't want to ever come across as like, I'm not grateful for this, or I'm not feeling super blessed, or I'm not super excited. But at the same time, I think it's like, I've kind of thought about over the last couple of years, like, my podcast and the businesses I've built have kind of been like my babies, like they're kind of like my first kids a little bit. And obviously having like a human child that I've created is going to be so much different than that. But it's also recognizing that like, hey, my life is going to be different. And I feel like it was kind of weird. I got sort of like attached to
I'd applied to speak at a conference that's at the end of April when I was like earlier in my pregnancy. And, I don't have like a big belly or anything. So baby doesn't feel like super real at that point. And I'm like, oh yeah, I can go present at a conference. It's not even in the country I live in when my baby's like less than 3 months old. That'll be no problem. And as I got bigger, I was like, I can't do that. Like, that's insane. Like, I don't even know what her schedule is going to be like. Like, she probably needs me during this time. And like, why would I travel and be like super stressed over this when she's so little? Like, I don't even know if I'll have her passport at that point. And so I ended up pulling out of the conference, which I know was the right move, but I got kind of attached to it. Like, I feel like this was sort of that thing that you were talking about with like knowing you have this freedom that's kind of disappearing or that it's shifting in a way. And I really had to kind of grapple personally with like, my life is changing and it's changing in a really beautiful way. And that's okay. And it's okay to kind of like mourn the loss of like, okay, I can't go to this conference this year. And the conference director is like a friend of mine. And she's like, there's other conferences. Like, it's okay that you can't speak this year. And I was like, okay, thanks. Thanks for like talking me down.
Yeah, no, it's so true. And I mean, you put it so well as just this idea of like mom guilt, which I hate to break it to you, but that doesn't go away. It's just, it just kind of amplifies. But I mean, there is, and again, this ability to hold like conflicting emotions within one body. Like there are these moments where you find yourself being like, oh, my freedom is slipping away, but then also being like, but I'm so happy and so grateful that like, I can like carry this baby. And, and just like you said, there's so many people that are struggling with infertility and like that just like, it just destroys me. And I know, what I feel about it is nothing compared to what the people struggling with it are feeling. And, my heart breaks for people. And I think we all know someone probably personally that is struggling with that. And it's just like, your heart breaks for them and their journey that they're on. And you do kind of find yourself like kind of straddling between being so grateful and so excited to have your life change in this way, but then also really looking, that change in the eye and realizing just how different things are about to be, especially when you tend to have more of like a location independent business like you and I do, or a business that requires more travel, or even just entrepreneurship in general, where you don't have the same kind of like safeguards or built-in support that you may get at a traditional job. And so, it's hard, and change is always hard. And I think you mix that with like the stressors of being pregnant and then like the hormones and all sorts of stuff. And you just feel like, everything feels like a really big deal. At least it did for me. And I just remember feeling like, is everything changing? Like, am I going to lose my business? Which I know a lot of us struggled with and still worry about during these times. Like, will my business survive this? Like, what is life going to be like? Will my family survive this? Like, there's just so much that was unknown and scary, and change is hard to begin with. And that was something that I don't know what else to say other than it was hard.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I can definitely, relate to that. And I'm sure we'll continue to relate to that as baby arrives and stuff. And so one of the things you mentioned is just around maternity leave. And I know in the US, maternity leave in general is just not great, like you said. And, in Canada, it is pretty good if you have a full-time job. I work for myself, so I'm sort of in the same position that you were in that it's like any maternity leave that I want to take, I sort of have to create it for myself. And so that's really what I've been working on the last couple of months, is like putting systems in place, backlogging work, making sure I have like a team in place who can support me for the things I want to continue, deciding what to pause, et cetera, et cetera. I'd love to hear a little bit about like your process with that and how you were able to, take time off and really like, I guess, like decompress from your business.
Yeah. So after I kind of like mentally and emotionally worked through all of the changes, and I was able to come to a little bit more clarity. And for me, I love like lists and systems and organized things. And so once I had kind of like had my time to really wrap my head around just everything that was happening. I was like, okay, now I can do something about it. And I had a goal of wanting to take 2 to 3 months off. And I always like to do what I call backwards math. And I like to start with, okay, if I'm going to continue to pay myself X amount of dollars every month, because up until this point, I had sort of salaried myself, which I was really excited about hitting that milestone. And if I wanted to basically be able to continue to pay myself my salary, I, said, okay, I need to make sure that I'm making, X amount of dollars beforehand, basically, so that there would just be enough money in the bank so that I could continue to pay myself over those 2 to 3 months without having to really do any work. So in order to do that, I basically front loaded a lot of my work. So I always like to do an annual review. I highly recommend anyone listening, if you aren't doing this already, I encourage you to do this. Now is a great time to do it. And you look at like everything. You spend half a day, sit down, do this, and break down every single service, offering, class, whatever it is, and how much revenue you drove from that thing. I do this every year. And then I like to look at it objectively and I say, what was working, what's not working. And what isn't working, then I have to look at it and say, is it time to release this? And sometimes it is. When I look at something, sometimes I'm surprised or I'm like, wow, I didn't even realize, this thing is such a huge driver in my business, but like consistently every month it's bringing in revenue. So I look at what's working and then I always try to like double down on what's working and I try to release what's not working. So I took a similar approach when it came to building a maternity leave. I looked at what was currently working in sort of this new era that we found ourselves in. And I looked at what wasn't working and I tried to front load some of that work. So if that meant maybe running a few extra enrollment periods, like for teacher trainings, or I started doing some virtual retreats where it's just like a half-day retreat. I started, kind of like reaching out to old clients and seeing if they wanted to, circle back and do some more sessions, things like that. And I just had a certain number in my head of what I needed to have in. So I can't remember my actual due date. It was like mid-November, but my little guy came, he was late. So he came like late November, but in my head, I had Halloween as my like cutoff date because that would be about, 38 weeks. And I thought, well, realistically, I know he could come at any point, but I was like, I should probably be like done with work by like Halloween. So I had a number in my head that I needed to have in the bank account by Halloween. And I just started plugging away, looking at what was working, doubling down on that, and also trying to be really smart about where I was spending my money. And I will say one thing, I think we all kind of looked at, where we were spending our money during COVID times and saw where we were spending it in ways that weren't necessarily necessary. And so I did a good job of kind of like reallocating funds, kind of streamlining my business in a way, looking ahead and automating things and basically just front loading and working until I had the amount of money that I needed to still pay myself for 3 months. And that really was my approach to it.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love how organized that is. And so far I've been taking kind of a similar approach to that. And I've also set my like offline date right around 38 weeks from my due date too. So that's reconfirming to hear. Cause I feel like it's like when you don't actually have an employer, like it's kind of weird because I'm like, well, if I feel good, I could kind of keep working. And I'm like, no, I need to just set a date in my brain. Like, and then I need to say it out loud and then I need to like stick to it and then tell other people I work with, because otherwise I'm just going to be like that person who's like in labor, like closing things out. That's not going to be good.
Yeah. And I knew that was going to be me as well. And I imagine knowing you as I do, I imagine that you like me would be like, still like either wrapping up projects or being like, coming up with like new ideas and starting to like develop new ideas when you're like 40 weeks pregnant. And it's just, it's too hard to not do that. And so for me, setting a firm date, and like I said, I like lists and being organized. So having like a dollar amount and a date that I needed to reach that dollar amount was where I started. And then I kind of worked backwards from there of like, okay, now how am I going to get to that number by that date.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. And did you find that it was like reasonable for you to kind of get like all of your projects and tasks done like before you went on maternity leave? Because I think that's one of the things that I've been kind of like, looking at my plan and I'm like, okay, I'm in third trimester, I'm getting bigger, I'm getting more tired. Like, can I realistically get everything done? And I think I can, but it's like, how much do I push myself is, I guess, where my mind's going. So I'm curious, like, were there anything that you had to kind of drop or shift, or was your plan pretty solid?
So my plan, thankfully, was pretty solid. I will say, I did a lot. I managed to smash a lot of work into one pregnancy once I was kind of back on my feet and able to work. More than anything, my struggle was the first half when I was so sick, when I thought I would be able to do more work. But that honestly ended up being the hardest time to work because I was just, had really bad like morning sickness and all sorts of other fun things that came along with my pregnancy. But I found it to be doable. But I'll tell you again, if there's one thing you take away from this, like, not only do I love lists, but I think lists are so helpful. And I like to do this anytime I either feel overwhelmed or like when I sit down and do like quarterly planning or yearly planning. I like to sit down, and I did this, and it was right around, that we were talking about that 2-month mark where I kind of was like, oh my gosh, like I'm in like 2 months, one way or another, there's going to be a kid here. So I need to like, get this stuff done. And I make a huge list. We're talking a big list. I take like a big like legal pad and I write down every single thing. And this is what I did before maternity leave. Every single thing that needed to be done. I made 2 lists. One was professional and one was personal. Every single thing that I felt like in that moment needed to be done before the baby came. And you write down this huge list, and, there's a bajillion things on it, and you write it all down. And then when you see it there written, I know for many people it can feel overwhelming. For me, it feels a little bit soothing because I can see it all in one place. Where I usually struggle is where I just have these ideas like bouncing around in my head. And if I don't have a place to like place them, I'll think about it every time I like can't work on it. I'll be like driving in the car and I'll be like, oh yeah, I can't forget to do this thing. So having it all in one place feels good to me. Then I look at that and I start like prioritizing. So I look and there's some things I'm like, okay, can I delegate some of these things? I'll look and I'll say, is there any of these things that actually aren't necessary? And there will be some, right? Like, okay, realistically, if I'd like to, get all the whatever scuff marks off the wall, like, is that necessary? No. So I can just take that off my list. So I cross off all the things that aren't necessary. Then I look and what can I delegate? And I'll delegate anything that I can delegate. And then I'm left with what I actually have to do. And then I start prioritizing, and I start with like, what's going to take the most time or what's the most time sensitive thing. And I just make a plan based around what's left of like, I'm working on this week. Like this has a due date of this date and this has a due date that's, 2 weeks later. So I'm going to start by working with this, and I like prioritize them. And then that helps me so much because then every day I feel like I show up, and then based on what I'm working on that week, based on due dates, I will usually do like a short like to-do list each day. And even when I found when I was in like my 3rd trimester, getting more tired, and I don't know if like naps have become your best friend yet, but I remember like I had to take a lot of naps, especially like my last month or so. But I had a must-do list, and I would just kind of bust out what I absolutely had to do. And then if that's all that got done that day, fine. That's all that needed to get done that day. If I felt up to it, then I would try to work ahead a little bit. So I basically a huge list of everything. What can I get rid of? Get rid of it. What can I delegate? Delegate that. What's left? I just started making a plan of what had to be done in what order. And then every day I could show up, to work at like my coffee table or dining room table or office. What do I need to do today? And I feel like it gave me so much clarity, and it allowed me to just focus on the task at hand because I knew I had planned out a way to get everything done instead of always looking at that big list where then I'm like, oh my gosh, I still have this and this and this and this and this. I could just sit down with some clarity and say, I'm focusing on this week, and I need to get these things done on these days. And that really, really helped me have direction and clarity and to stay focused.
Hey, yoga teachers. We're just taking a quick break from the podcast to talk about OfferingTree and memberships. If you teach regular yoga classes, do you offer a membership? When you start to have a loyal group of students who show up for you week after week, creating a membership is a great way to transition to reliable income that you can count on. You all know that I recommend OfferingTree as your online yoga business one-stop shop, and that's because OfferingTree makes it easy to set up and grow your membership on top of everything else that you're doing in your business. When you use OfferingTree, you can create memberships that include unique bundles of classes, courses, and on-demand offerings. And you can set up as many memberships as you want. You can charge clients monthly, annually, weekly, or choose your own billing cycle with OfferingTree's membership tools. And if reoccurring payments don't fit, you can also sell packages that can be refilled when needed. And as always, it's super simple to learn this aspect of OfferingTree and to set it up. So if you've been looking for an easier way to run the online part of your yoga business, definitely check out OfferingTree. It's an easy, all-in-one tool to host your website, schedule classes, private lessons, and sell memberships. And I have a special discount for you. Head on over to offeringtree.com/M.B.Om for 15% off 1 year of OfferingTree or 50% off the first 3 months. Once again, that's offeringtree.com/M.B.Om for a special discount on OfferingTree. All right, now back to the show.
Yeah, I love that. Your organizational brain really works for me. So that's super helpful. And then, so you said you planned kind of for like 2 to 3 months off. Did that end up being like enough time for you to kind of settle in before you started taking some of your work tasks back on?
That's a good question. Yes and no. It definitely, I don't think I could have done any less than that. Like I felt like 2 to 3 months was sort of like the minimum. But on the other hand, I also found myself really kind of getting like antsy to get back into my business because my business is something that I love so much and it brings me so much joy. It brings me so much fulfillment. And I was just, the first like few months of having, like you're having this like newborn and it's controlled chaos. It's beautiful. It's wonderful, but it's like pretty chaotic. So the first, I would say like 2 months, like really just like zip by. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh. But then you start to get, a little bit more of a routine. And then you start feeling like, okay, maybe I can bring some more on, but you still can't bring it on in the same capacity. And so then I just felt like I only let the work kind of like trickle in a little bit. And I still feel like even like a year out, I'm still not like full-time in my business. And I'm still trying to figure out like, what is the balance between like mom time and work time? And like, what do I want? So like, yeah, it was a good amount of time, but I also maybe could have used more, but I don't know. The thing that's so hard about answering that question is like, you don't know what you don't know. And I really just found myself like wanting to return to that part of me, like that work part of me. And it was almost like not even to like necessarily like do the work, but to like have a thing for me and to return to that like non-mom, like adult part of me that like, talks to someone other than like, nap time routines and feeding schedules and breast milk and, all of that to like return to this other part of me. And like, that was more the pull than being like, I have to go back to my business to keep it afloat, if that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure. Like, it's something that you're obviously really passionate about and that you love working on. And then I obviously haven't experienced this yet since my baby hasn't been born yet, but I can imagine there's kind of this draw to like, have something that's for you, like for Kelly, like not for like the mom part of you that, baby pork chop is like dependent on. It's like for you as who you are, regardless of having, a child and stuff like that. So I feel like that definitely makes sense. Did you start working without childcare or had you like planned out childcare for after those like first few months right away?
We started without childcare. And that was really challenging and very difficult. And And initially we were trying to figure out, and part of it was like, he was born in the middle of like a COVID surge. So at first we were really being very cautious of just like who was coming into the house. And when he was so little, trying to, really make sure that like we weren't exposing him unnecessarily to, germs and all of that. And so we kind of waited to do childcare longer than I think what we would have waited if it was just, different times, a different, time in life. But it was so hard. My little guy is still not a great sleeper, even a year out, which I know is probably not exciting for you to hear. But and my husband is a medical resident. He's almost done with his residency, but he has an incredibly kind of like wild, demanding schedule in which he may leave, maybe is working overnights or maybe gone for a few days at a time. And I found it really, really hard to function and navigate. He went back to work after about 6 weeks. So he was very lucky. He did get some paternity leave, which isn't like, very common in the US, but he was home with us for the first 6 weeks, which was amazing. But once he went back to work, it was really hard to, take on caring for this newborn without childcare, either professional childcare or a lot of family support. And most of that was, because of our choice, but then also being, alone a lot in the winter in, Minnesota. So we didn't have childcare at first. And then I felt like I really kind of hit like a little bit of a breaking point of just being like, this is way too much for me to juggle, because then I started easing back into work stuff, but then I was trying to, fit it in these naps. And then he was just taking these little like 20-minute naps like here and there. And then I was also like pumping and like there's so many things where I was just like, okay, I'm getting nothing done. Nothing. This is creating so much more frustration in my life. And that's when we then decided we did hire a nanny who we still have. She's wonderful. She's like this angel on earth. And right now we do childcare 3 days a week. And then my husband's schedule is still pretty wild. So we have childcare 3 days a week. And then usually 3 days a week, I'm solo with my little guy. And then we usually have 1 day a week where like we're all kind of together for like the full day. So that's what we ended up falling on, working best for us. But something that I've really learned, and something that, not that you've even asked for my advice on this, but I'm going to give it to you anyways, because you're pregnant. So that means you're open to a lot of unsolicited advice from strangers or people you know. But I feel like figuring out what your needs are and what you want is the biggest piece to all of this. And there is no right or wrong way to do it when you are figuring out how you personally want to run your business or run your household, or how you want to manage childcare, or what you want to do or what you don't want to do. And for me, that's been the biggest takeaway with pretty much anything with, my family and my child, is what is best for like us and what is best for our family. So for us right now, what's best for me and my happiness and my well-being and my business and my family and all of that is having certain days that I dedicate to business, and then having certain days that are fully dedicated to like me being able to be in mom role where I may not even open my email inbox. That's what works for us. For other people, it might be completely different. And you honestly may not know what's right or what you want until you're in it. And so it's taken some time for me to really kind of have like the childcare situation or figuring out like what I want. It takes time, and it's been evolving over the course of this whole like first year of motherhood to really figure out like, what do I want and what works? And I wouldn't have known what I wanted or what was going to work until I was in it. And so it's really kind of been this evolving thing over the past year.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. And I think too, I feel like this is, as somebody who's like a planner and who likes to be organized and stuff, I feel like this is one thing that has actually been quite challenging for me, is because it's like, I feel like there's only so much I can prepare for, right? Like I have to have the baby and get to know what she's like and what she needs and what I'm like, being a mom to her, and, figure out what I need. And it's kind of hard to plan for that. Like, it's hard to be like, in 4 months, and am I going to be like really excited to get back to work, or like in 4 months, am I going to be like, I'm really not ready to touch any of this? And so it does make it kind of hard to plan for it. And I guess you just kind of have to trust that you'll figure it out as you go. And, I think that's part of probably like the whole lesson in parenting in general, I would imagine, since we can't really like know what it's going to be like to be parents. But it's definitely been a tricky aspect for me, especially trying to plan like how long should I be offline, how many podcast episodes should I batch? Like, am I going to be able to record podcast episodes, when she's 4 months old, or is she going to be like the type of baby that literally cries if I put her down? It's like, I'm just not going to know. And there's no way for me to know. So I'm just trying to do my best to be like, I'll navigate what I can beforehand, and then we'll figure out the rest once she's here.
Yeah, 100%. And that was a struggle with me too. And I think the biggest thing that surprised me was I thought, when I was like early on in my pregnancy, and also like when, we decided that we wanted to try to have a family, I always thought that I would be back to traveling like really quickly. And that was something that I just thought I would want to do. And I think that came from, I've had so many women, like, especially go on my retreats, and they'll just be like, this is the first time I've ever left my kids alone, or not alone, but like I traveled alone without my children. And time and time again, and I'd be like, oh my gosh, like that's so exciting. How old are your kids? And they'd be like, oh, my kids are like 7, 9, and 12. And I just remember like being like, oh, like you haven't, and this is something, and I don't know about you, Amanda, but you'll have to tell me if you felt this too. But there's been some times where I've caught myself, like, I didn't even realize I could sometimes be judgmental in ways towards mothers until I was like in it. And I remember at the time thinking, being like, oh my gosh, like you haven't left your children for 7 years. And at the time, before I had kids, I'd, be like a little bit judgmental of that, which was very wrong of me. But now that I have kids, like, I've only left my little guy one time in a year, and it was so hard. And I left him for like a Thursday afternoon to like a Sunday at bedtime to go do like a weekend retreat. It was so hard. I was so anxious leading up to, leaving and doing the travel. And it wasn't as hard when I was actually like gone. But I can easily see now how all of a sudden 7 years could zip by before I ever like left my child. And it was just one of those things that I had no idea that I would be feeling that way until I was in it. And that where I thought like traveling would really be this like soul nourishing thing for me, like right off the bat, that I would want and need after, becoming a mother. It wasn't until I was in it that I was like, I don't really want to be traveling like I was before, at least not right now. And I had to have a lot of patience and kindness towards myself as I figured those things out, and to also be flexible and to recognize like, it's okay for me to change my mind, or it's okay for me to feel differently, and to be like, I think capping my travel at, maybe like 3 retreats a year tops, and, never being gone for longer than, 5 to 7 days. Like if that's what I'm comfortable with and what feels right to me now, like that's okay. And to not pass that judgment onto myself or onto anyone else, and to just recognize that that's where I'm at, and that's what I'm comfortable with, and that I can find a way to make my business work around, these new priorities and also boundaries that I'm setting for myself.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I've totally, passed judgment in that way as well towards, friends and acquaintances and stuff when they've said things like that. And I think I haven't fully stepped into it yet, but I feel like I definitely, understand the beginnings of that feeling. Like I'm already like, I don't want to take my child to like daycare and just like leave them there. Like I want to be with them all the time. My mom was like, I can babysit for a wedding that we have, coming up in the next year. And I was like, if you're staying with us, you can. I was like, that's the only way that's happening. She's like, well, no, I don't live in that city. And I was like, I'm not just leaving my baby with you. And this is like my mom, right? Like I fully trust my mom. Like obviously she raised me and I've turned out fine. Like it's not a trust issue, but it's like, I'm not just going to like leave my baby for a weekend. Like we'll get somebody who can like babysit in the place we're staying while we're at the wedding. Like I'm not going to just leave her.
I know. And there's so many things that really, truly like you don't like until you're in it, it's hard to know how you feel about it. And then there's so many things that just pop up that like you've literally never thought about. Right. And the thing that is really, well, one of the many things that is very hard about being a parent, being a mother in particular, is like the internet has so many opinions on what the right way to do something is, what the right or wrong way is. And I will say there's definitely like safe ways and not safe ways, like always, do what is the safest option. But there's so much gray area in the actual like parenting of things. And if you listen, like everyone has an opinion. And that's why I joke about, well, you're pregnant, so you're open to like unsolicited advice because people will just, throw it on you. But everyone has an opinion about everything. And it is so hard and so frustrating because it turns into like a lot of noise and you can kind of get into your head about it a little bit. And I was actually just texting a friend that has a newborn right now about this very thing, about what is like, she's trying to figure out how long does she want her baby to sleep in, the room with her, like in her bassinet. And there is no right or wrong answer. Like, yes, they recommend that you do it, for the first 6 months to a year, but really it's up to you. Or like how long, if you do choose to like breastfeed, like how long do you want to breastfeed your child? Or how long, are you comfortable taking your child to someone else's home for babysitting? Or do you want someone to come to you? Like people have opinions and know what worked best for them. And it can be really hard to drown out that noise and to remember that it's important. It's only important what works for you and your family. Like every family is just this living, breathing thing that's so different that will need something different. And every child is just a teeny tiny little human that has preferences or different needs. And I really had to learn how to be kind of like flexible and ride the wave of, well, this is what we need now. And I may change my mind, or we may change our mind, or we might try this. It might work, it might not. But to always kind of keep that like true north on my compass of, just trying to do what is best for us as a family.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I feel like I think there's maybe more awareness coming out kind of around this, because I think it's like once you become a mother, I think you kind of experience a lot of that noise on the internet and those opinions like you were talking about. But I feel like one thing I've really appreciated from, friends who are ahead of me in this is that they've said like, this is what's worked for me and my baby. Like, like not like this is how you need to mother your child, but like, here's some advice on what's worked for us. And I really kind of appreciate that approach in terms of like one friend was like, here, I'll give you like my whole like list of things that's been great for us. And she's like, just keep in mind, like you and your baby might be different from like me and my babies. And I really just like appreciated that, because then you can kind of take it as like, I'm so grateful for your advice. And it also gives me permission to like kind of experience the journey on my own, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that does. And I love that. And I love those friends that do that for me. I also like everyone needs that good friend that will like give it to you straight too. Like, and I'm sure you have this friend in your life or several people that will do this when you're like, what is labor and delivery actually like? And they'll just tell you like the real of like what it's about. Like you need those kind of friends too, that will just be like, listen, like this is what you need to prepare for. But I often like my mindset has really shifted in a way because of this and all of recognizing, all the noise and the opinions. It honestly has really changed the way that I look at business as well, and realizing that every single business is not this cookie cutter thing, especially when you do the kind of things that like we as yoga teachers or meditation teachers, like what we do, we all do it with our own special way and our own flair. And there is no like one size fits all. Like there's best practices and there's great like recommendations and wonderful tools out there, but you have to find the formula and the process that works for you and your business. And learning how to kind of navigate these changes and ebbs and flows of life, and having to, change my mind about things where I used to really kind of be like, I decided I want to do this. I'm going to go for it. I'm going to do it. And then just pursuing that served me really well up until this point where it's like, but now I have to be way more flexible, way more open, trying different things. And I've adopted a little bit of that approach into my business. And it's really just kind of changed the way that I've looked at things, of being a little less like regimented and willing to be a little bit more like experimental with it. And you may find that as you start to ease back into work after your maternity leave, that things even in your business might look a little bit different, because there's no way you can't go through such a big life transition of like becoming a mother, becoming a parent, or having a baby or being pregnant. You can't like end that journey the same person you were when you started. There's just it can't happen. There's so much change and transformation. You may find that when you return to your business that you may, want to either mix it up a little bit, or that things might look a little bit different, and that might serve you well.
Yeah, for sure. This is something I've been thinking a lot about and just trying to be really open to, because obviously, my time is going to be less than what I have now without a baby once she's here. Especially, I think we'll do something probably similar to what you've got set up, with some sort of probably, childcare at some point, maybe 4 to 6 months down the road. But just probably part-time. So I'll still be like the main caregiver for her. And so I'm very aware of the fact that, right now I have all these open hours in my day where I can spend my time. And I'm curious to see, when I do get back into it, like what are the things that really like become the priorities for me, or the things that kind of like call me of like, this is what I want to spend my time doing. Because I think there is something interesting when you've got this little human that you're responsible for, really. And that also you like love so much and that you want to spend time with. I think it kind of probably puts pressure on you in some ways to be like, okay, what is actually important to me in my business? Maybe you can tell me from experience, but that's kind of how I'm imagining it'll be.
Yeah. I think that's like, I never thought of it that way, but as you're describing that sounds very accurate. Like, I think there are so many things, like my time has just become so limited that I can really only do like the essentials. And there's so many things that I have found have kind of fallen to the wayside a little bit. Interesting. One of the biggest things that I've really backed off on is just like social media in general. And I don't know, motherhood has seemed to like turn me into like a more private person, but I also have found that I'm focusing my time more on, again, like when I was talking about like the annual review, like looking at like what's working and turning the dial, and then like double down on that. And so looking at like, where is my time best spent? And like, for me, social media is like fun and a way to be creative, but it wasn't necessarily the thing that's like really turning the dial, versus like focusing on like my podcast and creating like great content with that, or, working on different like collaborations, or, doing bigger events, but like less frequently. And so I've found that taking that same approach kind of to my business, and really having to streamline with like limited time, it's been kind of interesting, like what has been shown to me to be like not the most essential. And it's not always what I expected. Like private sessions and like social media are two of the things that I really scaled back on, because it's like, it wasn't like, although it might be fun, it wasn't really turning the dial, and it wasn't making a huge impact on my business, but it was taking up a lot of my time. And so it really made me look at like, where was I kind of wasting a lot of time, and kind of reprioritizing there. And it changes from time to time as well. Like the first year in particular, there's just so much, every year of a child's life, there's so much change. But when you look at like like your baby comes out and they're like this tiny little, like helpless, just like tiny little thing that like can barely open their eyes. And then in like 1 year now, like, Pork Chop came out like that. And now he's like walking and like starting to like form words and is like a kid. And that first year in particular, it's like every day is so different. And there's so much change and so much like just, you never know what you're going to get. And And so it's just been really eye-opening as to like, with my very limited time to kind of keep, the train on the tracks business-wise, like where should I be spending that time? And it really kind of surprised me what I realized was worth my time and what wasn't worth as much as my time.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really interesting to hear. I'm excited to kind of go through that journey myself. And I could pick your brain all day, Kelly. This has been so amazing. I'm curious, just as we wrap up here, is there anything else you want to share before we finish?
I think one of the first things that's kind of coming to me is if there's anyone that's listening that is either, thinking of starting a family or, is maybe pregnant, like you are, Amanda, or is maybe has like a young child like I do. I think one of my biggest takeaways from like just navigating my first year of motherhood while also trying to run my yoga business is to just be kind to yourself and to be patient and to like ride the wave. And it sounds kind of cliche because people are always like, oh, enjoy the time when they're young. And people used to say that to me all the time. And I'd kind of roll my eyes. I'm like, gosh, why does like everyone says that? And I mean, yes, I do agree with that sentiment now, but I think like I personally have never regretted scaling back on my business, to make space for family. And I'm not saying that that's what everyone should do, but what I am saying is that if you're finding yourself in this kind of a situation, just take some time to reflect on like, what actually makes me happy? Like, what do I want? And that's going to be such a different answer for everyone. So for me, what I really want is to make sure that I have some dedicated time with my son and not, working these, 50 to 80-hour weeks. Like I used to just like bust out like it was nobody's business. And for me, scaling back on that, I have had no regret doing it, but that doesn't mean that's necessarily the way for you. And I think it's so important to just remember that you alone are on this journey of becoming a parent, of managing child and business and all of the things, and to just be kind to yourself, be patient with yourself and with your child. And like, if your child falls asleep on you and it's nap time and you're like, oh, but I should really be going and like answering these emails, but it's really sweet just like having my baby nap on me and snuggle. Like, just if you want to take the snuggles, just like take the snuggles. If you want to go answer the emails, go answer the emails and try to alleviate some of that guilt that we all see. It's like the minute that baby like comes out, it's just like your ability to feel guilty about the smallest things just like amplifies. But just do what feels right to you, because I firmly believe like a well cared for and happy mom leads to a well cared for and happy baby. And, it truly is, you can't pour from an empty cup. And just doing what feels right to you for me has been like the best, I guess, piece of advice that I could give someone, or my biggest takeaway from kind of this first year of navigating being a mother and being a business owner, and having such a big life transition. And my other, I guess, little piece is don't be afraid to ask for help, but also don't be afraid to say no. And for me, learning how to set boundaries, both personally, professionally, like with family, now that baby's here, like all of that has been so important and so essential to figure out like what my boundaries are and to stand firm in them. And so if you need help, ask for help. But if someone is constantly being like, oh, can I come watch the baby? Can I do this? Can I do that? If you don't want them to, it's okay to say no. And again, reflecting on like what's important to you and what are your boundaries, and then standing firm in those. And that's all okay.
Amazing. Yeah, I love all of that. So thank you so much. I really appreciate you sharing all of that. And can you share with listeners where they can go to find you, learn more about you, follow along with your journey?
Sure. So you can find wherever you're listening to our voices, you can listen to my podcast, Mindful in Minutes. It's guided meditations, all less than 20 minutes. I also have a spinoff that's prenatal meditations, and that is called Meditation Mama. So if anyone is pregnant listening to this and you want some time to connect with baby while you meditate, go check that one out. Otherwise, my website, yogaforyouonline.com, is a great place to start. And you can find me on Instagram at yogaforyouonline. So all the things are there: events, retreats, podcasts, all the fun things. You can find them there.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Kelly. This has been such a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you. It was so fun to just connect and get caught up. And I'm so excited for you and your motherhood journey.
Thank you.
All right, friends, I hope that you enjoyed that episode of the podcast with Kelly Smith. Make sure you go and check out everything that she's got going on. She also has a fantastic Meditation Mama bonus bundle that you can find on her website. So I would definitely recommend going to check that out. She's got prenatal yoga classes, meditations, and lots of good stuff there for all the moms out there. So if you are expecting, go check that out. And if you have any questions about preparing for maternity leave, definitely reach out to Kelly or send me an email at info@mbomyoga.com and I can let you know how things are going for me. And just a huge thank you to OfferingTree for sponsoring this episode of the podcast. Make sure you go give them some love, offeringtree.com/M.B.Om. And if you have any questions about whether or not they're right for you, you can send an email to support@offeringtree.com. All right. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you next week. Bye for now.